Hey, everybody. It's Michelle, and I am completely cup runneth over with joy because today I get to announce that Chasing the Swallow, Truth, Science, and Hope for Pediatric Feeding and Swallowing Disorders is 100% done and in publication, and you can check out your copy on Amazon. And the best part, if that book moves you, if it grows your evidence-based triangle to engage in interprofessional practice, to do the root cause analysis to why the child is presenting with the PFD, to then engage with the team to get that child to a point of healing so that the real growth can begin, then y'all check out speechtherapypd.com because they are gracious enough to entertain all of these amazing, joyful ideas. And they're currently carrying the book for 13.5 ASHA CEUs. So thank you for being a part of the First Bite journey that led to Chasing the Swallow. And be sure to check out speechtherapypd.com for the 13.5 ASHA CEUs that accompany it. Happy learning. Hi, folks, and welcome to First Bite, Fed, Fun, and Functional, a speech therapy podcast sponsored by speechtherapypd.com. I am your host on this nerd venture, Michelle Dawson, MS, CCC, SLP, CLC, the All Things Peds SLP. I am a colleague in the trenches of home health early intervention right there with you. I run my own private practice, Heartwood Speech Therapy, here in Coletown, South Carolina, and I guest lecture nationwide on best practices for early intervention for the medically complex and fragile child. First Bite's mission is short and sweet, to bring light, hope, knowledge, and joy to the pediatric clinician, parent, or advocate.
By way of a nerdy conversation, so there's plenty of laughter too.
In this podcast, we cover everything from AAC to breastfeeding,
ethics on how to run a private practice,
pediatric dysphagia to clinical supervision,
and all other topics in the world of pediatric speech pathology. Our goal is to bring evidence-based practice straight to you by interviewing subject matter experts.
To break down the communication barriers so that we can access the knowledge of their fields.
Or, as a close friend says, to build the bridge.
By bringing other professionals and experts in our field together, we hope to spark advocacy, joy, and passion for continuing to grow and advance care for our little ones.
Every fourth episode, I join in. I'm Erin Forward, MSP, CCC, SLP, the Yankee by way of Rochester, New York transplant who actually inspired this journey. I bring a different perspective, that of a newish clinician with experience in early intervention, pediatric acute care, and nonprofit pediatric outpatient settings.
So sit back, relax, and watch out for all our squirrels and enjoy this geeky gig brought to you by speechtherapypd.com. All right, so I got to set the stage for today. Have you ever been in a room full of phenomenal leaders when all of a sudden in walks a woman with such beautiful presence and light that everyone actually freezes and all attention is turned on that one person? Well, y'all, honestly, that's our guest today, and I am simply in awe of her. I first met Sucheta several years ago at a CSAP convention, Council for State Association Presidents, and trust me when I say that the room fell silent and was filled with her infectious laughter immediately thereafter. Not the COVID cooties, but just that joyful laughter. Sucheta is as brilliant as she is beautiful, and our field is better because she is in it, because she shares her passion, her vision, and executes it all with just phenomenal leadership skills. So a little bit about her. Sucheta Kamath is an award-winning speech-language pathologist, a TEDx speaker, a tech entrepreneur who has created EXQ, a cloud-based digital curriculum for middle and high school students designed to directly personalize and build executive functional skills through games, error analysis, and metacognitive lessons. She's a host of the podcast Full Prefrontal, Exposing the Mysteries of Executive Function, where her invited guests range from neuroscientists, researchers, educators, learning specialists, journalists, and leaders. Finally, Sucheta serves on many boards and is deeply committed to volunteerism. The past 3 years, she founded and currently runs, along with her GASHA colleagues, GASHA Gives. That's Georgia Speech Hearing Association, y'all. And GASHA Gives is a free communication and executive function job readiness training program for previously homeless, incarcerated, and disenfranchised men in inner city Atlanta. And y'all, she is here today to talk all things executive function, which my ADD, ADHD self is like super ecstatic for because, I'm kind of hoping on getting some pointers. So huzzah, Sucheta, yay. Hi, lady.
Hi, how are you? First of all, thank you for having me. And what a kind and thoughtful and generous introduction. I really appreciate it. And the feeling is mutual, as you know, my friend. I love you. Thank you.
Oh my God, I love you. Every time I see you, it's just, you bring my heart joy, and you always have a great idea. Like, we run into each other at like ASHA or CSAP once a year, and then we're like, and then we bolt.
Yes, exactly. We need to find more time. I agree.
Yes. And and I have to say, you've mentored some of my dear students, and I am forever indebted to that. So thank you for always being there when, somebody needs a quick answer question. So thank you. Okay. So I am a weird subset of speech pathologists in the fact that my focus is pediatric feeding and swallowing, but I have to be honest, the thing that it is that you do, executive functioning, I did not really truthfully realize was in our scope of practice until you and I got to talking several years ago. So how did you get into executive function? Why is it relevant to our field? And fill this all in, because this is very interesting.
Great question. First of all, I think I honor and respect every single speech language pathologist because our scope of practice is vast and often underestimated by the phrasing of speech language pathologist. And people are often confused because it hyper focuses on pathology and speech and leaving all the other aspects of human communication. And the second part to our field is also medical, which I kind of again hate this two buckets because that's too concrete from where I sit in the domain of executive function, is a medical-based speech language pathology practice and then school-based or education-based. So none of that makes sense. But I'm born and raised in India. I had my training in India, and we were trained to be generalist, which was a gift. But generalist means you are exposed to many anomalies in the field, and one of the things it does is more than answering questions, raises many questions, and it instilled a desire in me to seek, search, and investigate and learn more. So my practice was in medical speech language pathology, focusing on brain disorders or neurogenic communication disorders, as we call them, and started with concussions, traumatic brain injury, multiple sclerosis, aneurysms, AVMs, seizure disorders, name it, and I had the exposure. One striking thing, though, that was so evident is no two patients were alike. And this is very confusing because when you talk about diabetes, these are the things you look for, and then there's a general management principle and then individual variation. Well, when the brain is affected, there's a lot more individual variation first, and then some general management principles. So as we were also the second part of my training, I have a master's in linguistics. So I was very interested in aphasia, Wernicke's and Broca's and just communication disorders related to speech production, comprehension, processing. But as I started working with brain injuries, one of the things that became evident is you can have something called right hemisphere dysfunction. I don't know if you remember that term. Before we called it executive function, it was right hemisphere dysfunction, which is basically saying, disorganized speech or disorganized discourse, inability to manage goals, but we never called them, and it had to be related to language. So all I'm saying is one of the things that we didn't get right, or our field as it's evolving, that we are operating in concrete buckets: language, speech production, cognition. Where I interacted and operated was the interplay between many aspects of the complex mechanism of brain functioning, and interactions with psychology, interaction with education and learning, and interaction with social anthropology, social psychology. And so that's how I landed in executive function before it was called executive function. And then a lot of adults that I started working with needed job reentry training program. And one of the most critical, I'm talking about 90s, we call them soft skills, which is another term we have underestimated and misunderstood. But if you look at the skills that are, that entail soft skills, they are not simply communication. They're also self-management. So that's kind of the genesis of my work in this field and my understanding of teaching and training and developing executive function.
Okay, how did you start working with social anthropology and social psychology? Are those professions readily available within Atlanta? Because you live in Atlanta, right?
Yes, I do. And no, it's not. So what happened is in 90s, late 90s, early 2000, when I lived in Boston. And I had a wonderful opportunity to hear Antonio Damasio, who is a neuroscientist who studies consciousness. And then Oliver Sacks. I don't know if you're familiar with Oliver Sacks and his writing. So I had a chance to attend his lecture.
Wait, you got to hear him?
Yes. And he had published Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. So there were some opportunities I had which really had a transformative impact on my own relationship to my field. And the third person who I was honored to have him as a guest was Franz de Waal, who is a primatologist. And I'm working with Robert Sapolsky, who's another neurobiologist. But I'm a polymath, you can say, and I was interested in the diversity of topics and out of personal interest. Also, if you look at the field of cognitive retraining, where most of my training principles come from, there's always this neuropsychology aspect. And there is this interplay between how do you help people to think about their thinking, and how do you help people learn new skills. And those particular areas of our teaching and learning are used to not be part of our curriculum. So I had to supplement that on my own, and I'm a lifelong learner. And so I started attending conferences and presenting and collaborating, and that's how I kind of developed. I mean, it's so funny, my podcast is only 4 years old, 4 years old, but I was able to get guests that I have watched and interacted with for the last 15 years. So they easily said, yes, sure. So that's the story, I guess.
Oh my gosh, this is folks, this is why we engage in interprofessional education, because we have to learn about the specialists that our patients will collaborate with. And yes, but that's amazing. You got to hear Oliver Sacks. Our clinic program, I had the students this semester, I was picked between two books. One was The Man Who Mistook His Wife for His Hat. The other was The Out-of-Sync Child. By the way, you pick your own, choose your own adventure. And then talk about new terms they learned and how that will evolve their therapeutic presence. And the ones who chose The Man Who Mistook the Wife for His Hat, the feedback on the book was just amazing. But I love that book, folks. If you haven't read it yet, go invest in Amazon. Yes. Okay. So with respect to executive function, I have to say that I don't work in this world, but my thought process is their ability. When I think of executive function, my takeaway is it's my ability in how to sequence my day's events so that I don't triple book myself, and or I have to stay focused and present in the moment, because I do have ADD and ADHD, and sometimes that's hard to stay in the moment because I get excited and then chase after a squirrel.
But I feel like there's a whole lot more to it than that. So how does this evolve? Help, any guidance?
Such a great question. And maybe I should set the stage by defining executive function, which
Yes.
I think you asked me earlier, but I didn't define.
Yes,
so let me start
that's
with
okay.
that. So, and it's quite confusing. I think if you haven't had training in cognition, I think it's really hard. It took me a long time to grasp the top down, bottom up. There are 32 definitions in the field. There is an agreement, disagreement phenomenon going on. But I think there's general settled view that executive function refer to the higher order cognitive control process for attainment of a specific goal. So I'll simplify that, which means it involves a set of skills essential to appropriately adjust one's thoughts, emotions, and actions, but in accordance with changing environment and challenging times, so that the personal goals can be achieved. But the caveat there is the goals must be set by self, for self, and not in a selfish way, more enlightened way. So sorry, let me kind of break this definition down into further parts, because it's very complex way of thinking about executive function. And it's very unfortunate that we typically think executive function as organization planning, sequencing, or taking care of business or managing goals. But to me, that's like the seven blind men and the elephant story. I don't know if you know that story, which I grew up on that story. So there was a king who had 8 men and blindfolded them and brought them to the kingdom to show this to his kingdom. And he put an elephant in the middle and asked each blinded man, what is an elephant? And so one says, oh, elephant is like a pillar, because he was touching the leg of the elephant. One said, oh, elephant is like a snake. He was touching the tail, and so on and so forth. So I think sometimes if you don't have the perspective, the big picture perspective, you might end up defining executive function in a very narrow way. And that can also limit the way you intervene or support and help develop. So it's really critical that your foundational understanding and definition needs to be solid. So let's talk about set of skills. So these are set of skills, and these set of skills are cognitive set of skills. These are affective set of skills. So first of all, executive function is collection of set of skills. It's not a thing. It's a collection of set of skills. So you use these skills, appropriately adjust one's thoughts, emotions, so that you can produce actions. So if you can think about it, your thoughts are invisible, your emotions are semi-visible, but if you have a stiff upper lip, as Britishers say, you may not show them, but actions are visible. So executive function is the primary way you translate your knowledge into results. So it's not what you know, it's what you do with what you know is executive function. So, for example, I've been in this building for 15 years, and I cannot tell you, every month at least one email comes from the building managers saying that so-and-so has parked their car illegally or in a handicap spot without having the handicap sign. That is executive function failure. Now, this could be intentional, right? So there's not stupidity, it's actually malice. That means I'm running late and this is a juicy parking spot, I'm going to take it. That's failure of executive function. The second way to think about it, we get images of somebody parking their car on the white line. So 2 spots are taken instead of 1. So, of course, you can see my building manager is very busy. But so we get an email saying that, come on, people, you're and they public shame you. So they send the email with the picture of the car. But what it says that you should use the parking spot correctly. You shouldn't park in the handicap spot when you shouldn't. But are you doing what you know? So in that way, executive function is actually backbone of moral behavior. Executive function is backbone of contentment, compassion, empathy, because all those perspectives, all those ways of being or acting or emoting or speaking are reliant on knowing what to do and doing what you know what to do. So that's one component of executive function. But the second piece that I was talking about is this ability to adapt appropriately, which is to adjust your thoughts, emotions, and actions in accordance with changing environment and challenging times. So this is really the second piece, and that's why it's so critical for our practice. Because what are we teaching? One of the most amazing things that, and I used to supervise a lot of kids, which I don't anymore. Recently, I mentor a lot of people, but I don't supervise students in university. But one of the things you will see that is the same distinction between a novice and an expert. So novice needs a lot of rules to follow, and they are very rigid about their rules, right? And you have a little bit of 80 kids, and so you know this process that they do what you ask, they don't apply the elbow room, or they will argue with you if you break the rule that you have for them. And then an expert knows what the wiggle room should be or is. So executive function are mostly evident in crisis, in hard times, during uncertainty, in circumstances of ambiguity, during roadblocks, and even during change or loss. So if you think about current climate, everything I'm talking about is relying or requiring us to activate our executive function. So executive function allows you to adapt or pivot or think on your feet, to come up with alternatives that work for you to achieve the goals you have created for yourselves, and so that you can move forward. So if your mom comes up with a rule for you to hang your PJs before you change into school clothes, and you don't hang the clothes, mom is going to ride your tail. That means mom's executive function skills went into it. So it's really important that when we teach, and I know you do a lot of peat swallowing, right? So, and one of the things that is really critical from executive function lens is when you hand the baton from you as a clinician to parents as the mentors of that program, feeding program, your executive function need to be dialed down, and their executive function skills need to be dialed up. And I think sometimes clinicians, particularly helper professions, we are so used to helping that we forget to stop helping. And so if you want executive function to really emerge, you have to stop helping and switch to cueing to know that help is needed.
Yes. No, this is why we engage in parent coaching instead of utilizing the direct service delivery model. If we go in and we do the therapy that 1 hour a week and we deliver the services and then we walk out the door, then the rest of the 120 or 167 hours a week, the family does not have the basic skills in order to carry that over. So that's part of the backbone behind why we are supposed to utilize parent coaching within early intervention, within home-based services, within the world of PFD, pediatric feeding disorders, because you just hit the nail on the head. 100%, absolutely. Also, I had so many funny thoughts were running through my head when you were talking about like the parking analogy, because I somehow managed to parallel park between two of those cement bumpers and get my front right tire stuck between them. No idea how I did it, and it was it was definitely interesting. I had to get the boys' barber to help me move my car because I could not get it out, and I was like, and my 8-year-old was like, "How did you do this?" I was like, "I don't actually know." So I'm not sure where in the executive functioning that broke down, but I'm going with visual spatial cues because that's not a strong suit. But
no, and that's such a good point, because a very important executive function skill set is prediction and
where my body is in space
analysis. So this visual spatial analysis synthesis skills is a foundational ability that actually allows you to appraise or gauge. So it's essential for parallel parking. It's also essential for distance traveling. It's also essential for furniture rearrangement. It's also essential for backpack management, spatial compacting, the desk, like keeping your desk clutter free. All that requires incredible visual spatial analysis synthesis skills, and they are, because they are responsibility of the right hemisphere prefrontal cortex, for sure.
Yes, and all of those are absolutely critical must have in order to work in early intervention, because we're traveling to patients' homes. We're supposed to use, least restrictive environment, home-based services only. And yes, I have so many follow-up questions, Sucheta, about like the role of fatigue and burnout in this. And what about, you were talking about changing climate. I mean, the pandemic and that huge switch in the pandemic. And was there a rise in executive function disorders, or do we see more people rising to the challenge of that switch?
Well, I can say, if I can interject quickly, so there's a lot of research. We are beginning to understand the impact of failure to yield, so to speak. So it's when I was talking about this climate changing environment and challenging times, is so the challenging, one of the most important component of executive function is called temporal discounting. That means your ability to gauge your own behaviors through passage of time. How will I be next year? How will I be in 6 months? Would I actually continue to save money, for example? And what they have research finds that stress is one of the biggest barrier in our ability to continue to adapt and change and thrive during challenging times, because we become heavy temporal discounters. So we kind of underestimate the impact of our failed connections to the current moment. We're like, nah, that me of tomorrow, she will be fine. And so we
That's a lie.
Yes. And we take greater risks and we blow off. There's a lot of research that talks about greater procrastination. It talks about less saving for tomorrow. It talks about overeating. It talks about actually engaging in illegal or unsavory behaviors, because really not having any relationship with the future self. So you're absolutely right. I think the challenging environments create an incredible hyper awareness of the current moment without any connection to self in the continuation of time. And then we become these people who are here now. Oh my God, I'm panicking and I need to do this. And then you become hyper vigilant. You become extremely stressed out. And then you're not doing the basic things that will help you. And I'll give you a quick analogy. When I moved to Boston, and it was my first nor'easter. I don't know, those who live in Northeast know what a nor'easter is, but anybody who doesn't doesn't have that experience. So nor'easter, and I was a new driver, even though I was 25. So the instructions were, Sucheta, if you're ever stuck in a snowstorm, let go the brake, right? Great in theory. And then I got stuck in a nor'easter. And then I took the exit because I couldn't even see a single thing, like 2 inches from the, my windshield. So I decided to take the exit, and my car did 180 degree, and I decided to brake. Exactly opposite of what I was told. So knowledge was great, but when it came to application, as the environment became challenging and changing, I was not able to adapt. And this is not because I'm a foolish person. This is not because I lack the intellect, or it doesn't even mean I lack the bandwidth to do it. I had no experience. So it's really important that in therapeutic environment, one of the ways to inoculate or help build executive function is lots and lots of experiences, repeated experiences, but not repetitious experience. It's a really good distinction to have. So it cannot be the same thing you do 100 times. You have to do similar things 100 times.
Oh, wait. Okay. I'm thinking about the children that I work with AAC devices when we're working on language acquisition for like a new core vocab word that has multiple meanings. Like on, you turn the light on, versus you could turn the TV on, versus you could turn your, I have one little guy who has an iPad specific for music videos. We could turn that on. And I've been trying to explain to the mom that you have to utilize that same word in different ways so that we grasp the concept of this word has multiple meanings. And you just hit it on the head.
Yes. And so when you work on receptive, again, one of the ways to judge and evaluate impact of executive function proficiency, it is in doing. So understanding or comprehension is invisible. So you can't tell executive function proficiency. So it has to be the way you emote, the way you communicate, or the way you act. So so as we think about this homophones, or we are talking about words with multiple meanings, what we want is adaptability of usage, right? So it's very hard because we are teaching it, and the most when will we certify the kid has grasped the concept of on is when the child actually uses it himself.
He did it. He did it today to turn on request. Hey Jude, that's his favorite. He loves the Beatles. He is a 4-year-old that has an affinity for excellent music. And we said it's really cute. And he was able to say I want, and then he would gesture towards whatever it was that he wanted, and he can say I want, and we were like, all right, let's expansion with his AAC device, and he did I want on, and then we were able to model please with visual, verbal, and like tactile cues, and he said please, and then he smiled and he signed for more, and I was like, oh my god, that's like a 5-word utterance. Yes.
Yes. So those are exactly the victories that when we are facilitating, because it's so interesting. I mean, I am just so fascinated with our field and the way we teach new skills. We do like scaffolding, we do this modeling, we do coaching, and as the skills emerge, if we can add metacognition to it, do I know that I have learned a new skill? Would be another, like having a little sidebar. And I like to give this example, when during Shakespeare's time, I think 16th century, there used to be actors who would come on the stage and act, and then they would have one actor who would step forward and explain what just happened. And in case those who didn't catch up. And I love that idea, because your prefrontal cortex is the one that steps forward and says, allow me to explain. That's your metacognition right there.
I feel like there's followed by like a dramatic bow with like, here's your sign.
Or a mic drop.
Bow.
Ow,
Oh
yes.
God. Yes. I just, I hear my grandma in the back. My grandma raised me, and she would always say, baby girl, don't drive faster than your guardian angel can fly. And I feel like that's my prefrontal cortex going, oh, Michelle, I don't know. That's okay. Wait. So then talk to me. What exactly does my very exhausted prefrontal cortex do? And how does that play into helping executive function skills develop in children?
Oh, Lord. So, yes, our prefrontal cortex. So, just to describe the gross architecture of human prefrontal cortex, which is, of course, it's the last to emerge in evolution, and it's first to get impaired. So one important thing, and when we talk about impairment, or why all disabilities and disorders will have executive function component or impact, is because, so let's think about human prefrontal cortex, right? What's the architecture of that? So you have motor strip, right, next to your prefrontal cortex. And so most of the motor neurons fly through that, and then the direction to take action or to react, to communicate, all that goes through prefrontal cortex. So any injury in parts of the brain, ultimately the wiring of that information loops through prefrontal cortex. So it's going to affect the functioning that is responsible, that's governed by the prefrontal cortex. So what do we have? So think about a few centers in the brain, right? So you have lateral surface, which is split into ventrolateral region, and then dorsolateral region, and then the medial surface, which is like, if you can take your hands, put your hands together, fold them in the middle, and then what you get, and open the fist. So when you see the fist and the fingers that are folded of the fist, that's the medial. So you have right medial prefrontal cortex and left medial prefrontal cortex. But these areas have very specific responsibility. For example, the right prefrontal cortex allows you to reflect on your own and others' mental states, which is what we call theory of mind. So as you can see, impairment here can cause this inability to take a perspective of the other. And there are many ways to understand that, but we have affective theory of mind, we have cognitive theory of mind, we have interpersonal theory of mind, and intrapersonal theory of mind. So there, as we understand, so that's one ability that governs social communication regulation. So when we talk about teaching children or adults this ability to monitor how we behave in society, very much prefrontal cortex is involved. The second area you can think about is performing two or more tasks together. Your ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is involved for it. And then the third, just a quick shout out to episodic memory retrieval, which is your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So let's talk about this frontal cortex development. This is a slowly developing network, and more rather than when we think about growth, we think about like sprouting, right? Sprouting and growing taller. But like what marks the prefrontal cortex proficiency is networking. That means how effectively areas in the brain talk to the prefrontal cortex. And so a very important stage of development must happen, which is called pruning. That means you actually start chopping. So in order for the growth to happen or strengthen, we need to let go the connections that are weak or loose. And so many disorders, the pruning doesn't happen. That could be one way of describing a prefrontal cortex network. The second way to think about this is the prefrontal cortex is interconnectivity is missing. So there's no cohesion. So one of the strongest ways executive function are demonstrated is there is that ability to see the big picture, right? So you're standing on top of the mountain and you can look at the prairie and you're able to take an inventory of the whole large terrain. So Lynn Meltzer, for example, talks about this getting in the weeds, which is you're standing at the bottom of a hill and you look up and all you see is a canopy of trees. You may see the leaves, but you can't see anything. Then you go stand on top of the mountaintop and all you see is the top of the canopy, right? So this ability to see the top of the mountain and from the mountain to see the tiny leaves is called convergent and divergent thinking process, which leads to mental flexibility. So those brains that have this art and science of able to go into the minor minutiae and come up to see the big picture tend to have incredibly well-balanced, future-forward thinking ability. Well, so a 9-year-old is far more proficient than a 6-year-old. And a
Oh, God, tell me about it.
Yes, and you're seeing that in live. And a 16-year-old is far more proficient than a 9-year-old. But the caveat is if you have two 16-year-olds and two 9-year-olds, I like to describe executive dysfunction from a framework of two important components. One, if there's a need and the child is under functioning in the area of a need and demand, then that's a dysfunction. And second, if the peers are performing and the child is not, then it's a dysfunction. Because the most important ways to understand executive function is social regulation. So if a child that is not regulating skills and abilities that his peers are able to becomes dysfunctional in the context of observable competence.
Yes. And all I can think is, I feel like the 9-year-olds might outpace the 16-year-olds when hormone comes into play. But just a thought as a boy mom. So like...
No, actually, it feels like it, but one of the things that, yes, there's, I call it OTM, which is one track mind. Yes, you will see a teenager getting into OTM. One lane highway. That's not a highway, my dear friend. That's what they're traveling on. But what also does is by 16-year-olds, life experiences are enriched. And so one thing that I will say, if you think about a role of play in developing executive function, is if you are dealing with children who are very young, you will see them engaging in huge imaginative play. So they will take a cup and make it upside down, and now that they will call a volcano that's erupting because they have another little cup of water underneath, and they say, ooh, the volcano is going to erupt, and they'll topple the two and pretend to have lava coming out. That is very concrete, but using imagination to imagine things that don't exist. And when you go to school, one of the a lot of creativity research talks about, which is very important when we talk about executive function is that schooling takes out the creativity, because what it does is it says all the playing that you're doing needs to be stopped because it's interfering with this organized learning. But what it does is, if you have reading, that can be a great source of imaginative, this ability to do time travel and ability to do this traveling in your imagination to imagine experiences that you haven't had personally. And this is why one of the biggest challenges that we need to really think about training executive function and poverty is the void of high exposure to experiences that are not common. So I like to give this example. So we went to, when my son was 13 and I was invited to speak in Zurich. So I had gone there, and then we decided to make a round trip, come back from Salzburg area of France. And so we rented bikes, and we each had a bike lock. And then we said, okay, this sounds like a wonderful spot, great city, like a town center. We'll park our bikes, and then we will go and come back after 2 hours. So I park my bike and he parks his bike. And then I noticed the pole to which he had parked his bike was barely 6 feet tall. Okay? So now you have to imagine a bike attached to a pole that doesn't anchor into anything, or it's not. Mine was like 16 feet tall, which was like a lamppost, and his was not. And I noticed it. He didn't. And then I took out my camera. Oh my God, I traumatized my child. But anyways, I took out my camera and I had a quick session there. And I said, what do you think? How is the spot? Did we choose a good spot? He says, oh yeah, great. I says, tell me a little bit about our bikes when we come back. And he says, what do you mean? I said, no, just look around. Tell me. He says, oh, lock. He says, let me check the lock. Lock is solid. Your lock is solid. Mom, I have the keys. You have the keys. I think we're safe. And then he looked around and he says, I see lots of bikes everywhere. And I said, I am concerned that our bikes are not secure. And he's like, so I refused to tell him why, okay? Because this is another very important component of training executive function, is to not give answers. And so I have this video that goes on and on for 10 minutes. He could not figure out why. So I narrowed it down by giving him cues, and that, I said, my dear child, I'm a little bit worried about your bike. I think my bike is okay. So he figured out that it was something to do with the pole. But he, from his context as a 12-year-old, had not experienced people stealing bikes. So he lacked the context of people stealing bikes by hook or crook. Now, I grew up in India and rode bikes everywhere and had locks and had hacks to break the locks and hacks to double lock without double locks. And so I had such a rich context as an adult and as a person who had ridden a lot of bikes. He was not a bike rider other than riding in our neighborhood, but not locking it. So what I'm trying to say, that sometimes lack of experiences is one of the reasons why children look like they have executive dysfunction. So we should be really, really careful in labeling. We have to create opportunities when we think about treatment, where all these opportunities are such that children know how to problem solve in circumstances they have never experienced before. And speech language pathologists can be very limited, or they may limit themselves in therapeutic activities. So functional context is really, really critical.
Okay, this takes me back to etiologies, because I understand that the patient population that I serve tends to have more complex past medical histories, right? But this is the why. Folks, when you're writing your plan of care, when you're writing your treatment goals and you're planning intervention, you have to have a firm foundation in what the disorder, disease, and comorbidities are of the little one that you're treating, because it's going to change the trajectory of how you write and do therapy. So, for instance, a couple years ago, I worked with this little one who originally was sent for dysphagia referral because we had significant issues with aspiration on all consistencies, blah, 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 blah. And it was a baby. Oh my God, curly hair, just sweet little eyes. But I kept encouraging the mother, there is something more. This is not just oropharyngeal dysphagia. There's something that's driving this, because she wasn't hitting her developmental milestones at like 6 months the way that she was supposed to be hitting her developmental milestones. Could not be comforted. Turns out we had to change. Well, we had to seek second opinions, change pediatricians, get her to a neurologist. They did MRI, CT scans, and found out that she had lissencephaly, and that's going to folks, that's where we have a smooth brain. It's a very, very rare genetic condition, and within this, you're going to have severe cognitive component, and that completely changed the entire allied health teams, all of our plan of cares, because it had to be updated according to the current prognosis. Another one is, I've had the pleasure of working with little ones that had agenesis of the corpus callosum as well as dysgenesis of the corpus callosum. Agenesis is absence of the corpus callosum. Dysgenesis, it was a malformation. I never did peg what that child's genetic condition was, because he had a couple of, it was like a slight variation on like one of the chromosomes, but it wasn't like a complete deletion. It was like one of those like translocations, like one part attached to a different part, but it didn't have a syndrome associated with it. But his corpus callosum, just, I don't know how to describe the shape when they did the testing. It was not a typical corpus callosum. And if your two halves of your brain are not talking to each other, how are you going to be able to develop these higher level skills when we're just trying to cross midline with our bodies? And that is, y'all, you got to know this. This is, again, I circle back to, this is why we speak with interprofessional practice partners and make referrals. So, and you were absolutely correct. For those of us that are called to serve the least of these, those that work in impoverished areas, high poverty, high crime rate, we have witnessed firsthand systemic racism within the field of medicine, as well as sexism, because throw an ism in there and you're going to find it. And you have to make sure that when you're going in and you're doing your evaluations, if you identify a disorder or a disease, that label will get attached to that child for perpetuity and can absolutely impact the trajectory of that child's life. And lack of exposure is not a lack of skill. So this is why we do dynamic assessments, and you don't rely on just one assessment. Sorry, I feel really strongly about that. I had to put that in there.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, clinicians' biases regarding capability. We sometimes, those who are in a position to help, as I was mentioning earlier, we have certain notion of what the help should look like, and sometimes the cultural context and the context of poverty's impact on the brain, we have this narrative which is we must pull ourselves by the bootstraps, and this is a very, very entrenched in American psyche. So poverty is viewed as, unknowingly of course, that somebody who's failing to try harder, and there is a inherent blame in parents not being cultured enough or care for personal agency in their children. And so this kind of pre-assumptions can be deeply hurtful to the child's future with a clinician, because she might assume that there's a lack of sophistication or lack of care or lack of interest in the child's welfare. Well, if the mom has 3 jobs, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and she had a mom who would walk 1 hour. Michelle, walk 1 hour to get to the clinic to bring her child. And it wasn't until their 5th visit that my friend found out, and she said, "What? How are you going back?" She says, "Well, we'll be walking back." And so she started dropping her, or rather it was 10 minutes away, but it would take them 1 hour with her child. Then she would have to bring another child with her. So sometimes I think we just don't understand the complexities and invisible social barriers, and dysfunction to us may tempt us to become saviors, and we should be very careful about that, because I think I like to ask, in what ways can I be help to you? And so when we talk about executive function, goals designed by self for self is the hallmark of executive function proficiency. And it's very, very counter to how we conduct our therapy, right? We tell you what the goals are going to be. We are going to, semi going to involve you in goal formation, but pretty much I'm going to dictate. So it's really important to really let go that control and join in a partnership, and also have a metacognitive tail end of every therapy session. Tell me what you learned. Tell me why I'm doing what I'm doing, and tell me how does this help and change your life. So if we don't have those components there, sometimes the well-meaning therapy will not have transfer and generalization.
Okay, metacognition. Explain this concept, because I've heard this word and honest to God, I don't know what it means. So I'm sitting over here nodding like, yeah, Sucheta, I'm totally with you. And then in my head, I'm like, I have no freaking clue.
So metacognition, yes. And this is probably one of the reasons I have specialized in executive function, is the concept of metacognition. So metacognition is, of course, this capacity and ability to monitor your own thinking. So in simplest way is how you think about your thinking. So I'm thinking...
Not well. I have negative self-talk. Okay, continue.
Yes, we'll come to that. That's a little bit different. So there's affective metacognitive abilities and cognitive, which is, again, this always is very typical. But learning to become an accurate self-observer helps us stay out of our blind alleys and make good decisions, right? This is one of the researchers who talks about these blind alleys. And so this capacity to reflect on what we know and what we don't know, and what we don't know, we don't know.
Yes, I love talking about, I don't know the answer to this, but let me help find the answer to that. I love that lifelong learning. Yes.
Okay, so think about, so there's a Stephen Fleming is one of the cognitive neuroscientists, and he's done a lot of work in this area. And I hope I'm quoting his definition correctly, but metacognition is an internal tribunal that rules on the soundness of our mental representation. So it's a tribunal that gets together and says, come on, Sucheta, you're wrong, or that's right, or the way I think is this. So the metacognition typically is an afterthought. So you let's say you are a child and you hit somebody, or you grabbed somebody's crayon, right? And then what we do, we come in and say, John, say sorry to Mary, right? And so then John is made to say sorry. And John, out of fear of his mother, but there's no metacognition. Metacognition is really saying, I wanted a crayon. How did I go about it? Oh, I grabbed it. Oh, Mary didn't let go. I slapped her. Ah, I see. That was not proper. So this ability to evaluate the sequence of behaviors and thought process behind it and emotions behind it, and then have some sort of tribunal that, like says, evaluative judgment without being self-critical. So it's not like saying you're such a bad person, John, but it's saying that was not right, is that metacognitive ability. Does that make sense? So executive function is in essence, in order to master or propel your executive function competence, it requires a deep emotional connection to errors. Now, that's a huge problem because people are not happy about looking back at themselves. The last thing I want to say about that metacognitive process is the mistakes are extremely critical to metacognitive development. So this ability to reflect, so it's a self-reflection process, and that's how we identify with our own limitations, and only then we become strategic thinkers. So the two vital, if you ask me what are three vital ways to teach and help children master executive function, I would say teach them the concept of future self, help them become self-aware, and third is teach them how to devise strategies, not use strategies you give them, but devise strategies. So the ultimate, my therapeutic process is always about, I'm going to teach you how to figure out your strategies. I'm not going to tell you what the strategies are. So let me give you an example, okay? So I lock myself out of my house, right? Well, hopefully that one incident should be so traumatic that you should never have to be locked out of the house again. So you come up with a solution that has much stronger longevity to it. But if you have been locked out of your house 7 times, then there's a serious problem. There's some metacognitive disconnect. So first time is okay, but if it repeats, somewhere there's a breakdown in self-awareness and there's a breakdown in strategic thinking.
Our family likes to tell the story of me growing up. We would run out of dishwasher detergent, so I kept trying to figure out what's the right ratio of regular laundry or regular soap, like the Dawn that's concentrated. Long story short, I flooded the dishwasher in the kitchen with copious bubbles coming over and all over the kitchen. I did it 3 times. And my dad was like, I just don't understand how you keep doing it. And I'm like, well, I just have yet to find the right ratio of how much of this I need to use. And Dad's like, I don't think it works that way, honey. After the 3rd, he was like, you're going to have to buy the family a new dishwasher. Guess what? I quit doing it. But I got to be honest, part of me still wonders, but how much Dawn can I put in the dishwasher to clean the dishes such that it doesn't froth over into the sink?
Are you not reading the instructions on the Dawn? Well,
it says don't use in the dishwasher, but why? I need to know the why. And I don't know. My dad said my learning style is I was the kid that learned by pissing on the electric fence. That's not kind, but he's not wrong.
Oh, can I just tell you something really critical? And that's goes hand in hand with ADHD.
Does it really?
Yes. And I mean, this can be a gift, but it can be a curse. And I'll tell you how. So if you actually need to piss on the fence, as your dad says, which translates in a kosher language that you actually need the experience to see the outcome and which you haven't imagined. So one of the benefits of human cognition is our capacity to reflect or simulate, which is prefrontal cortex does this, by the way, simulate outcomes without actually having to experience them. And there's something called, secondly, it is called vicarious learning. That means I can learn by watching my husband, my sister, my dad load the dishwasher and learn from their experiences. So now everybody but you have learned to not put Dawn, but you haven't.
Yes.
I'm making this up. But what happens is there could be some resistance in you. And this is quite often I see with ADHD folks I work with, because they really battle with autonomy, freedom to make my choices, and they compromise efficacy. Not you, but what I mean by efficacy is the world is designed in such a way that we can benefit by not encountering a mistake, but just observe other people make the mistake and don't repeat it. And that way we actually save the system, and we become very, very effective in taking decisions and managing our time and managing our goals without really compromising our own values, because we have said, never shall I again. I like the Scarlett O'Hara. I will never go hungry again. That declaration is what executive function declaration needs to be.
That's I keep going back to, but the science, but what does the science say about the dish soap? And yes, and I have to say, but that's very, very incredibly true. On this side of it, there are some things that I can quickly pick up on watching somebody else and go, oof, that is not going to end well for them, and recognize and not do. But then there are other things like, parallel parking and visual spatial, but I got this. I have enough backup cameras. I literally told my 8-year-old, I was like, don't worry, mommy has enough backup cameras in the new car that this seems like a spaceship. I can figure this out. And you know what? That was not right.
Okay, so I'm going to do a therapy with you in this moment. Okay?
Yes, perfect.
So all right. So let's take this dishwasher situation. So I'm going to ask you, as my client, how important is it for you to know how much Dawn soap to put in it?
It depends on what time of the
No,
day. If
there's-
it's 2 o'clock.
No, now.
Like-
I mean, I'm just going to ask you to generalize.
now?
I'm not going to give you any wiggle room. I'm going to be the boss brain with you. Okay.
Boss brain, it's not
Yes.
important.
Okay. So
I
hold on
know
one
it's
second.
not important, but it is.
No. I don't mean it's not important. How important it is to you, because really, like, I had this client, and it was really important to him to actually figure out a shortcut so that he spent, okay, I kid you not, he was he was 16. He spent, literally, the kid who never did his homework spent 5 hours creating a contraption in his room that anytime his parents would open the door without knocking, it would squirt water on them. Brilliant engineering. Brilliant engineering, okay?
Brilliant.
So what it showed me that he had the skills and the bandwidth to design something, but it was invested in area that was not, it was self-sabotaging, right? So your query can be very wonderful, and inquisitiveness is what has gotten you far along in your own career. But you have to really think about, sometimes if you're getting stuck, can you unglue yourself from that? Because this could be your being stuck. And I'm not calling you stuck. I'm just saying that it's a deep desire, but I think it might be good to now maybe experiment with it 5 times. And after that, you say, whatever my conclusion is, that's going to be my conclusion. Because I think it can really take away your mental resources.
Yes, this is one of the random thoughts that runs through my head when I wake up between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning. So I'm serious, like that pops up at least once a month.
As I said.
Yes, oy vey, it's there. There's other ones there, but like, so folks, if you're ever wondering what really grinds my gears, it's how much Dawn can I safely use in the dishwasher? And if you actually know the answer to that, then please
do not email her. Please don't.
Oh my
please
God.
Don't spare her, please.
I love you so much. This is great. Okay. All right. Sucheta, we've run over but folks, please, for other non-dishwasher related analogies, I would highly recommend prefrontal. I mean, I can't say it because it's too many R's.
Full
and
prefrontal.
Yes, full
Exposing
prefrontal.
the mysteries of executive function.
Yes,
A mouthful.
but you are, bar none, a subject matter expert in what it is that you do, and your passion shines through. And having these skills, if you too, like myself, have a touch of ADD and ADHD, a little bit of anxiety to even things out, then you wonder, what can I do to better serve my patients? How can I grow my own skill set? And part of that is having those crucial conversations, but then learning where to go next. So, Sucheta, how can they reach you? How can they learn from you? Fill us in on the details, please.
Well, I am so happy to connect with you all, and thank you, Michelle, for your amazing platform and such a fabulous conversation. So if you want to reach me, you can look me up at exqinfinite-knowhow.com. That is my educational 100% digital software, EXQ, that teaches executive function, evaluates and assesses executive function in 7 areas of cognition, and also provides a year-long curriculum. It's also available for parents to purchase. And second is, you can always email me at Sucheta, Sucheta, at cerebralmatters.com, or Sucheta, Sucheta, at exqinfinite-knowhow.com. Oh, and yes, do subscribe to my podcast, since Michelle and I are putting in so much time and effort and enjoy this process of talking to amazing people. So yeah, that will be Full Prefrontal Podcast and fullprefrontal.com.
Yes. Everybody, be sure to check us out at First Bite Podcast on Instagram, on Facebook. Be sure to leave us a review on Apple iTunes. Also, don't forget, Chasing the Swallow is available on Amazon and recently approved for 13.5 ASHA continuing education hours through speechtherapypb.com. And you can check that on social media on Instagram as well. You know, I love it when you send me messages of joy and hope And we are in this together to make the world better for those that we serve and for our colleagues. So we appreciate you. Sucheta, you are amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for coming. Everybody, go check her out.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, and amen to everything you said.
Feeding Matters guides system-wide changes by uniting caregivers, professionals, and community partners under the Pediatric Feeding Disorder Alliance. So what is this alliance? The Alliance is an open access collaborative community focused on achieving strategic goals within 3 focus areas: education, advocacy, and research. So who is the Alliance? It's you. The Alliance is open to any person passionate about improving care for children with a pediatric feeding disorder. To date, 187 professionals, caregivers, and partners have joined the Alliance. You can join today by visiting the Feeding Matters website at www.feedingmatters.org. Click on PFD Alliance tab and sign up today. Change is possible when we work together. That's a wrap, folks. Once again, thank you for listening to First Bite, fed, fun, and functional. I'm your humble but yet sassy host, Michelle Dawson, the All Things Peds SLP. This podcast is part of a course offered for continuing education through speechtherapypd.com. Please check out the website if you'd like to learn more about CEU opportunities for this episode, as well as the ones that are archived. And as always, remember, feed your mind, feed your soul, be kind, and feed those babies.